behind the scenes who make our work possible. Passing an historic rescue package and a full-year funding bill would be a serious undertaking, even in ordinary circumstances. And of course, this pandemic year has brought anything but ordinary circumstances to the Senate, just like everywhere else. For about 10 months and counting, COVID-19 has imposed new challenges on hundreds of people who are already plenty busy enough. After much of the Senate worked remotely in April, we came back to work in early May, like the essential institution that we are. Month after month, we've taken smart and careful precautions and remained an exemplary safe workplace. And all along, we've not just continued to govern, but completed landmark confirmations and historic legislation for the American people. None of this would have been possible without many people beyond the 100 of us with our names on these desks. I want to thank the Office of the Secretary of the Senate, led by Julie Adams and Mary Sue Jones. This team encompasses everyone from the talented professionals who sit on the dais to the official reporters of debates, to dispersing, and many other offices. Thanks to our parliamentarian, Elizabeth McDonough, who faithfully calls the balls and strikes. She won the admiration of our temporary presider, Chief Justice Roberts, before we reclaimed her as the Senate's own. Thanks also to the Senate Sergeant at Arms, Mike Stenger, and Jennifer Hemingway, and their whole team, from the doorkeepers to the IT team that stood up enormous telework capabilities almost overnight, to the workers who clean offices, move furniture, and keep this place running in hundreds of ways. Our architect of the Capitol, Brett Blanton, assumed his role just before the pandemic hit. He never missed a beat. His team tackled cleaning in a way that exceeded industry standards, reconceived the food services, and again physically kept the Capitol functioning. Of course, very special thanks are due to our attending physician, Dr. Brian Monahan, and the entire team that he leads. Believe me, they already had a full-time job caring for the members of Congress and the Supreme Court. We've leaned on Dr. Monahan in countless ways all year long. His expertise and wise counsel have been a credit to the Senate throughout the pandemic. Here in the chamber, I want to thank our cloakroom teams led by Gary Myrick on the Democratic side and Robert Duncan on ours. Duncan had only just stepped into his current role when the crisis began to unfold. He navigated about 10 years worth of big challenges in his first 10 months in the top job. Thanks to him and his capable deputy, Chris Tuck. Another key group these past months have been our Rules Committee led by Chairman Blunt and his staff director, Fitzhugh Elder. The committee has run point on coordinating many of the changes, and adaptations that have helped keep this body safe. They've done an outstanding job without enough recognition or thanks. We're grateful to the men and women of the Capitol Police, led by Chief Stephen Sund, who have stood their post even when most of the rest of us have worked remotely. They've stood strong during this pandemic, during protests, both peaceful and otherwise, and during the other daily operations that they handle with courage and professionalism. And across the board, I want to thank all of our Senate staff, both the smaller footprint who have continued physically working at the Capitol and those who kept up their hard work remotely have confronted all kinds of novel challenges. Our institution and our country are grateful to you all. Last but not least, I want to thank my own team. My personal office, led by departing Chief of Staff Bill Maxson, has fought every day for Kentuckians' needs and priorities throughout this crisis. Our state offices, steered by Terry Carmack, kept us connected to our constituents in new ways. My communications director, Robert Stewart, and all their colleagues who staff these operations are invaluable to me and to Kentucky. Here in the Capitol, my leadership staff has given incredible amounts of themselves to me, to our team, and to the Senate the entire year. Remember, this is somehow still the same calendar year that began with an impeachment trial, continued through the CARES Act, Other major legislation over the summer, a Supreme Court vacancy and confirmation this fall, and finally the all-out legislative sprint since Thanksgiving. First, my two deputy chiefs of staff. Steph Muckall runs our operations in an incredibly, historically complex time to handle operations. She's worn about 10 different hats all year long, as usual. And Scott Rabb handles policy. He's led his colleagues through a legislative year like no other, from mammoth negotiations and historic rescue packages to our most particular priorities and everything in between. We've all leaned on Scott heavily, and he's been indispensable. Beneath them, within our operation, are a lot of talented folks I'm lucky to have. I want to name them very briefly. My chief counsel, Andrew Ferguson, offers brilliant advice from impeachment to policy to the judiciary. Robert Karam, my defense policy expert, has brought critical institutional leadership as 2020 tested everything from national security to continuity of government. Jane Lee handles her massive portfolio and more besides, with incredible effectiveness and calm under fire, and she sings the best Christmas carols in the office. Terry Van Doren is a policy master who delivers for Kentucky and the country every time. Erica Suarez and Jim Neal, expert liaisons and advisors who keep me connected inside the Senate and beyond. Steve Donaldson, my point man on all things election law during this election year. John Chappies, a seasoned Senate veteran who picked quite the time to join our team and cover economic policy. Jody Wright fights to get good people in good positions with good cheer. Andy Quinn is a master of words and ideas. David Popp heads my press team. He, Doug Andres, Scott Sloopman, and their whole operation keep my message and the Republican conference's message front and center. Sarah Steinberg manages my days, and Alex Jenkins manages my office, both with great humor and greater professionalism. Moon Selfab keeps our technology systems running and our spirits high. I have to mention our healthcare expert, Jen Koskowski, who worked remotely this spring while expecting her baby boy and has been cheering us on while on maternity leave. We can't wait to get her back. And thanks to Grace Graham and Peter Oppenheim, who Senator Alexander generously shared from his Health Committee staff to help us in Jen's absence. Rounding out our leadership team are crack researchers Robert Utze and David Haltman, skilled communicators Dylan Borbeck, Valerie Chicola, Suzanne Youngblood, Emily Houck, and Catherine Grayson. And our frontline troops, the jack of all trades who keep everybody in line, Victoria Mason, Elise Stebick, and Spencer Abraham. Finally, Mr. President, at the head of this entire team is our fearless leader, our Chief of Staff, Sharon Soderstrom. Everybody on Capitol Hill and everybody in Washington knows that Sharon is one of the smartest, most dedicated, and most effective staff leaders working at any level in any branch of government. She's my first call and my last call on every subject. She was in the leader's office before I was. She supported both Trent Lott and Bill Frist. So I count my blessings on a daily basis that I am lucky, number 3. Sharon carries the weight of the world on her shoulders and not only delivers, but somehow prioritizes lightening everybody else's load while she's at it. A walking master class in leadership. I'm proud of all that we've accomplished for the country in this challenging year, and I couldn't be gladder to be heading into 2021 with these talented professionals at my side. So I thank them, Mr. President. I thank them one and all.
On the nomination? Is there sufficient second? There appears to be. and the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander, Ms. Baldwin, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Bennett. Mrs. Blackburn. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blunt.
Hello, everyone. You are tuning in live to the COVID-19 relief package vote broadcast. We are just awaiting the United States Senate to vote for the COVID-19 relief package. Yesterday, if you joined the broadcast, you heard the senior lawmakers agreeing on the COVID-19 deal. The $900 billion COVID-19 relief package deal. The legislative text is finalized. Now we are just awaiting for the vote on the United States Senate floor. Thank you for joining, everyone, from wherever you are watching. Right now, you're on your screen. You're looking at a regular Senate business that typically happens. It's not just about the COVID-19 relief package, but also votes on nominations. And so we're just awaiting here for the Senate vote. But as Chris said correctly here, that it just passed the House, and now we're waiting for the Senate, and then eventually President Trump will sign it. The expectation is that President Trump will indeed sign this bill.
Mrs. Gillibrand. Mr. Graham. Mr. Grassley. Ms. Harris. Ms. Hassan. Mr. Hawley. Mr. Heinrich. Ms. Hirono. Mr. Hoven. Mrs. Hyde-Smith. Mr. Inhofe. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Jones. Mr. Kane. Mr. Kelly. Mr. Kennedy. Mr. King.
Yes, so Let me put this tweet back up on the screen. You're watching a live video feed of the U.S. Senate floor, but it goes through the House, Senate, then to the President. Yes, it does. It goes it's through the House. It went through the House. Then we're awaiting the Senate vote. Then it will go to the President's desk. So we are awaiting the United States Senate vote on the COVID-19 relief package. Thank you for joining this broadcast. Really appreciate you all tuning in. I'm just going to let it run for a little bit here. So we're going to listen in to regular Senate business here, but we will eventually get to the vote in a few moments.
Mrs. Murray. Mr. Paul. Mr. Perdue. Mr. Peters. Mr. Portman. Mr. Reed. Mr. Risch. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Romney. Ms. Rosen. Mr. Rounds. Mr. Rubio. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Sass. Mr. Schatz. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Scott of Florida. Mr. Scott of South Carolina. Mrs. Shaheen. Mr. Shelby. Ms. Sinema. Ms. Smith. Ms. Stabenow. Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Tester. Mr. Thune. Mr. Tillis. Mr. Toomey. Mr. Udall. Mr. Van Hollen. Mr. Warner. Ms. Warren. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wyden. Mr. Young. Senators voting in the affirmative: Collins, Cornyn, Kramer, Gardner, Graham, Hyde-Smith, Inhofe, McConnell, Risch, Wicker. Senators voting in the negative: Bennett, Casey, Duckworth, Durbin, Hassan, Heinrich.
Hello, everyone. If you're just tuning in right now to HAPS Television, we are awaiting the Senate vote for the COVID-19 relief package vote. We are awaiting the Senate vote. You're watching live coverage here on HAPS TV. A $900 billion deal that was definitely debated between Republicans and Democrats over these past few days is now at its final stage. We have just heard that the United States House of Representatives has passed the bill. Now it goes to the United States Senate to pass as well, and then it goes to President Donald Trump's desk. $900 billion for this relief package. The last major economic aid was in March, $1.8 trillion, the CARES Act. Now we are here with this COVID-19 relief package vote just moments away here. You're watching regular Senate business take place. You know, you'll get your nomination votes now and then. So we're just awaiting this package to be voted on by the 100 U.S. senators that occupy the United States Senate. We're going to tune back in. Even though this is regular Senate business, I don't want to be, on camera and still talking to you the second that they start the vote. I want you to be able to hear the process. We're almost seems like we're done with, we're getting close to this vote here of this confirmation ending pretty soon. So let's, for Eric Soskin, but let's tune in. Let's tune back in.
Ms. Klobuchar, no. Mr. Reed, no. Mr. Rubio, aye. Mr. Thune, aye. Mr. Hoven, aye. Ms. Baldwin. Ms. Baldwin, no. Mr. Portman, aye. Mr. King, no. Mrs. Capito, aye. Mr. Cotton, aye. Mr. Young, aye. Mr. Markey, no. Ms. Cortez Masto, no. Mr. Tillis, aye. Mrs. Fisher, aye. Mr. Scott, Florida, aye. Mr. Merkley, no. Miss Rosen, no. Mr. Langford, aye. Mrs. Shaheen, no. Mr. Moran, aye. Later. Mr. Cassidy, aye. Mrs. Murray, aye. Mrs. Blackburn, aye. Miss Hirono, no. Mr. Murphy, no. Mr. Sass, aye. Mr. Barrasso, aye. Mrs. Feinstein, no. Mr. Johnson, aye. Mr. Warner, no. Mr. Tester, no. Mrs. Gillibrand, no. Mr. Wyden, no. Mr. Romney, aye. Mr. Scott of South Carolina, aye.
Also limit to 7 amendment for both of them. There's 7 days.
Mr. Kennedy, aye. Mr. Paul, aye. Mr. Braun, aye. Mr. Menendez, no. Mr. Blumenthal, no. Mr. Van Hollen, no. Miss Ernst, aye. Mr. Carden, no. Mr. Sanders, no. Ms. Markowski, aye. Mr. Burr, aye. Mr. Hawley, aye. Mr. Coons, no. Mr. Whitehouse, no.
If you have just joined this broadcast, my name is Cameron Sadeghi. I am broadcasting through HAPS TV. You are watching a live restream of C-SPAN 2 of the United States Senate floor. We are awaiting the COVID-19 relief package vote in the United States Senate. In the United States House of Representatives, the other chamber of Congress, passed the COVID-19 relief package that is $900 billion of relief. We are awaiting the vote. As you see here, regular Senate business taking place. We are moments away from a vote. For those of you who have just joined this broadcast, this relief package is the last major economic aid since March with the CARES Act of $1.8 trillion in relief. This package has its differences from the CARES Act. For example, in terms of direct checks, only $600 for direct checks to Americans, not the $1,200 we saw in March. As you see on your screen, $600 direct checks for Americans who qualify with, as you see on your screen, $1,200 for couples. So that is one of the major differences between this COVID-19 relief package in comparison to the last relief that occurred in March. When we get to the Senate vote for the COVID-19 relief package, we will take you there. As you, I see in the comment section, a lot of you are saying, hurry up, hurry up. Well, other Senate business has to take place as well. So Ryan comments here. I'm now 3 months behind on rent, so this will help but be back to square one, which helps. Thank you for bringing up the rent assistance aspect of this bill. I should place this on the screen here. For those of you who have just tuned in, rental assistance. In this package, $25 billion will be provided for emergency rental assistance. An extension of eviction moratoriums through January 31st are also a part of the package. So thanks for tuning in and making that comment in regards to your own personal situation. And it was important because that's also another component here with this package. As we still await here for the Senate vote on the COVID-19 relief package, let's go through some headlines regarding this package. So some of you have heard about the vaccine distribution process, vaccines being distributed early during this time of the year. In this package, there will be $20 billion for vaccine distribution. So as America plans to recover, as the United States plans to overcome the COVID-19 health crisis, money being distributed for the vaccine distribution. So money being, more funds in terms of vaccine distribution. So $20 billion there. In terms of unemployment benefits, talked about this during the weekend. NBC News had reported it on the weekend, and it can now be confirmed. The COVID-19 relief package includes a $300 increase in federal unemployment insurance benefits through mid-March. One of the major headlines in this package with in regards to unemployment benefits, And some of you are wondering, yes, it may go through, it did go through the House, it did go through the Senate, but what does President Trump think about this COVID-19 relief package? Well, I think this is pretty telling. White House spokesman Ben Williamson says that President Trump is expected to sign the bill. So President Trump is likely to sign off on the COVID-19 relief package. Also, some of you are wondering about the timeline for the COVID-19 direct, or for this, for the direct checks to Americans during this time. In an interview with CNBC, Stephen Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, says, quote, people are going to see this money at the beginning of next week, unquote. Those are the words of Stephen Mnuchin to CNBC today in an interview. Comment here, at least this bill includes rental assistance. Thank you for the comment. Another comment here, food assistance. God knows we need more, but this is better than nothing. Yes, I should have also included that in the takeover to put on the screen. But yes, $13 billion added to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. We have seen growing food insecurity during this COVID-19 health and economic crisis that has taken place in the United States and all around the world. So again, $13 billion for SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. So the United States, thank you, Matt, for your comment. Is it failing or passing? So the United States House of Representatives just passed the bill. It needs to go through the United States Senate, and then it goes to President Trump's desk to sign off to officially confirm this relief package. So right now, you could say soon to be passed relief package, as Chris correctly states here. Senior lawmakers reached an agreement yesterday. They didn't do the formal vote yesterday because the legislative text was not finalized yet. Now we're seeing the formal voting process take place here. So it is going to most likely pass. Yes, I mean, we've seen, 2020 has been a strange year to say the least. We cannot guarantee unless we see the votes here in the United States Senate, but it appears to be that this bill will pass. However, we have to see for ourselves here on C-SPAN. Oh, when I said here on C-SPAN, I mean a rebroadcast from C-SPAN. We are moments away from the United States Senate floor voting on the COVID-19 relief package of $900 billion. Current Senate business taking place in terms of nomination votes. So that's just, you'll get that time to time. They're not only, despite this being a monumental package, a major piece of legislation, that does not mean that the COVID-19 relief package is the only business that is conducted on the United States Senate floor. I asked this question last broadcast, and I want to ask all of you, what are you going to do with the COVID-19 direct checks? I'll play your comments on the screen. What are you going to do with the $600 COVID-19 direct check if you qualify for this? So let me play it on the screen just to get the question back out to all of you. So here's the layout for the direct checks. $600 direct checks for Americans making up to $75,000 a year, and $1,200 for couples earning up to $150,000 per year, as well as a $600 payment for each dependent child. So for you, if you fit into any of those categories, what are you going to use? How are you going to use the direct check? If you want to comment, you can here, and I'll display it on the screen. We had some interesting answers last time, and I always, I want to include the audience here. And here's Chris saying, I will be using it to pay bills. If anyone else wants to comment, you can as well, and I'll display it on the screen. Pay my bills, following what same response as what Chris said right now in the comment section. Just noticing the new HAPS commenters here on HAPS TV. You can watch more of these kinds of broadcasts through haps.tv. There are news broadcasts, entertainment broadcasts, political broadcasts, sports broadcasts, any kind of broadcast you want, you can get. I'm going to be catching up on bills and buying things for the house. Thanks for the comment. Matt says, give it to charity or pay someone's rent. Another commenter, pay some bills and pay some of my son's bills. Another interesting question regarding something that I posed the other broadcast here. Hello to you as well. I think I just subscribed to you. Here you're coming up on the screen. Hello from Boston. Hello. So I broadcasted throughout this weekend regarding this relief package. There was an expectation that the vote would occur on Sunday night. That did not happen. So we're here on Monday night with the House passing and now awaiting the Senate. Another comment regarding the question I posed, going to give to a friend to pay the medical bill. That was I posed a question regarding the direct checks. Another question maybe to all of you, and I would love your thoughts. When the CARES Act passed, what did you do with the $1,200 direct check? And are there any? Do you feel like there's some payment that you cannot make with this incoming relief package because it is $600? I would love to hear what you thought of the last stimulus or the last relief. Did you enjoy? Did you enjoy your? Did you feel that the last relief package was adequate for you? I would love to see what you have to say on that. The $1,200 direct checks last time. A YouTube commenter says it's not enough, but it's better than nothing. But hopefully Joe Biden will help us out a lot more. So during the incoming president's term, Joe Biden, President-elect Joe Biden right now, Chuck Schumer was on the Senate floor yesterday talking about the necessity of more relief upcoming in 2021. So you heard some of that talk yesterday. The Senate Minority Leader, Chuck Schumer, saying the same, expressing similar sentiment. Please pay my rent. I can't find any help in Kentucky. I can't believe my family and I are alive. Thanks for the comment. Sorry to hear your struggles. I gave my last check away as well. That's in reference to the CARES Act direct checks. Chris says, I don't believe Joe Biden will do much. I believe he will do less than Trump has. Well, President Trump, in terms of this COVID-19 relief package itself, he believed that there should have been greater direct checks, that what you see in this relief package was not enough. That was his belief. Here, now we're going to wait for the 2021 term and see what the incoming president-elect will say. But I think we may be getting, let's tune in. Let's see if we're going to get to the relief package vote now. Oh, actually, we're close, but we're not there just yet. Need to pay credit cards, paying for all the medication for family having COVID, 600. So thank you for your comment. Let's listen in to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell.
That the House agree to the amendment of the Senate to the bill H.R. 133 entitled An Act to Promote Economic Partnership and Cooperation between the United States and Mexico with an amendment to the Senate amendment.
I move to concur in the House amendment to the Senate amendment to H.R. 133.
The motion is pending.
I ask unanimous consent there be 60 minutes of debate equally divided between the leaders or their designees, and that following the use or yielding back of that time, the Senate vote on the motion to concur without further motions or amendments in order, and that 60 affirmative votes be required to adopt the motion to concur.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Mr. President.
The Senator from North Dakota.
Mr. President, North Dakota is an energy powerhouse, and our lignite producers work around the clock to ensure homes and businesses in the Midwest have affordable and reliable access to power when it's needed most. But the PTC, the wind production tax credit, is creating artificially low prices in markets for power generation. Qualified wind projects are receiving up to 2.5 cents per kilowatt hour from the taxpayer. These subsidies distort the market and are forcing out the critical coal-fired baseload generation we need to keep the lights on. Since Congress established a wind production tax credit in 1992, wind power has been able to transition from an emerging technology to a multi-billion-dollar industry that is clearly commercially viable. That's why we worked on a bipartisan agreement in 2015 to phase down and sunset the wind tax credit at the end of 2019. We had an agreement to do the phase out, and the wind industry agreed to it. I worked with Senator Thune and AWEA, the American Wind Energy Association, and others to do it. And they agreed. We had an agreement. That's why we are opposed to extending the PTC and offer an amendment to strike it. We saw what happened in California over the summer, and we can't afford to have blackouts and brownouts during the coldest of winter weather months. We instead must strengthen grid resiliency and reliability by keeping diverse sources of generation available at all times, including when the wind isn't blowing or the sun isn't shining. That means baseload. Instead of extending the production tax credit, we should be working on making technologies like carbon capture and sequestration commercially viable. The American Wind Energy Association states on its website that, quote, growth in the wind industry is expected to remain strong when the PTC is fully phased out. Why then are we considering another extension of this credit when the leading trade association expects to see strong growth for the wind industry without the credit? We need to bring back a level playing field for competition in our electricity markets and reverse the trend of taxpayers continuing to subsidize a mature, multi-billion-dollar wind industry. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment and ensure that the wind production tax credit sunsets. And with that, I'd like to ask for some words from my co-sponsor on the amendment, Senator Kramer.
Mr. President.
Senator from North Dakota.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to join my colleague, Senator Hoeven, in offering this amendment and urging our colleagues to support the amendment to strip the wind production tax credit from this massive bill. Mr. President, I feel like I'm living in an episode of The Twilight Zone. And I wish I could say that I'm surprised, but I'm not. Because here we go again. Despite numerous requests and appeals and deals with the leader and the chairman of the Finance Committee to not jam this body with a 13th extension of the wind production tax credit, here we are with another one in front of us. Since the credit's inception in 1992, and for a lot of those years, I was a utility regulator, it has always been promised that it would be temporary and would expire. Last year, we got jammed at the last minute with another extension, and rightly, the people back home are really, really upset with us. And it didn't sit very well with me either. That's why in April of this year, I led a letter to Leader McConnell with colleagues from West Virginia, Wyoming, and Georgia saying it was time to finally level the playing field and get rid of this market-distorting atrocity. In July, I led another letter to Chairman Grassley with even more colleagues from West Virginia, Wyoming, Tennessee, Oklahoma, and Pennsylvania with the same message: let this credit expire. Yet here we are again. The requests have fallen on deaf ears, and we've simply been given another bitter pill to swallow with the extension today. Some in this town have pointed to an extension in carbon sequestration credits like 45Q and 48A as if they were an equal trade. They're not. Despite years of pleading, the Treasury Department, yes, this Treasury Department, still has not finalized regulations. So an extension of 45Q is moot if there's no way to actually monetize the credit. Of equal importance, financial investors have said if renewable credits are extended, they will absorb whatever tax appetite exists because they're predictable. And those deals have been done many times. And just to reiterate, they can't even utilize 45Q because Treasury hasn't finished the regulations 3 years after Congress expanded the credit. More to the point, while there are some great proposed carbon sequestration projects planned in North Dakota, their benefit is targeted, while in contrast, hundreds of miners and local communities they built are being hurt by the extension of the production tax credit. I strongly support carbon sequester projects, but to assume that the potential benefits of 45Q or 48A are equal to the unilateral harm of the wind credit is disingenuous at best. And I've heard from utilities who actually use the wind PTC, but they said they don't need it because the market is so awash with wind credits, they can't even monetize them. It's completely upside down. In fact, the PTC credits are actually taking money away from other clean energy projects like nuclear, clean coal, taking emissions-free energy right off the grid. Just a few days ago, Politico said this: the simplest option for tax extenders would be to let all 33 that are scheduled to expire at the end of the year to be renewed. I have a simpler plan. Let them all expire. K Street wouldn't like it, but it'd be one less section in this giant package. So, Mr. President, one final point. In all my time in Congress, and that's been 8 years now, the wind production tax credit has never been extended through regular order or an open discussion or even hearings. Despite our objections or promises from the wind industry that it should expire, in the 11th hour with the government shutdown looming, it gets dropped into the members' laps. That alone should be a red flag that the only time it has enough chance to pass is when it rides the coattails of our national defense and the government operations. It's shameful, Mr. President, and I support the amendment from Senator Hoeven, and I urge my colleagues to support it as well. Let the wind PTC expire. I yield my time.
Mr. President, I thank my colleague, Senator Kramer, and turn to my colleague, Senator Langford.
Mr. President,
The senator from Oklahoma.
Mr. President, I'll be brief. My staff did what many of us did today. We spent the day digging through a 5,600-page bill, trying to find out what's in it. We broke it up into hundreds of pages of chunks and separated among our staff and just started reading through it as quickly as we could, trying to be able to pull out the details. We found a lot of things that we really like. We found a few surprises as well. So help us, we found right in the middle of the document on tax policy, a zombie. The wind production tax credit. Something that we had heard had died. In fact, something that we had heard died 2 years ago. In fact, something that we had heard died 6 years ago when all of us agreed it should die. In fact, the plan was take it down a little bit each and every year until it finally got to zero. The problem was when it got to zero, some lobbyists helped somebody get it back in last year, and it suddenly, after going to zero, reappeared. And then, so help me, it reappeared again. So this temporary credit that distorts the market, that literally changes the prices and all of our energy, whether that be oil or gas or coal or solar or hydroelectric or nuclear. It gives a special perk to one, and all of the rest of them get furious, but for whatever reason, this simple credit can't seem to go away. When we agree to something, we should probably stick to it. And we agreed years ago to phase this out. But yet this zombie keeps reappearing and walking the halls of the Senate. Our simple challenge is this. Let's put this zombie in the daylight. Let's have the real argument over it and determine, is this distorting the energy market for everybody else, including all of our renewables? Is it something we need to keep? Now, I live in Oklahoma, and if you know our song, you know the wind comes sweeping down the plains. We have been called the Saudi Arabia of wind power. I promise you can't drive very far in Oklahoma without seeing a field of windmills. We've got lots of wind power, and we think it's a great energy source. But it's a mature energy source, and it does not need the wind production tax credit. So let's sunset it. With that, I yield.
Mr. President, I'd like to thank my colleague, Senator Langford. Also, we'd like to thank Senator Lamar Alexander, Senator Barrasso, others that support this legislation. And with that, I ask unanimous consent that our motion to concur with the amendment, which is at the desk, be agreed to, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object, Mr. President.
The senator from Oregon.
Mr. President and colleagues, I am going to be brief. And I just want to give the Senate a sense of where we are with respect to this renewable energy issue. In front of us now is a bipartisan agreement to extend a variety of approaches that are going to allow us to promote greener energy that reduces carbon emissions. And when I talk to colleagues on both sides of the aisle, there's enormous support for that, enormous support for the effort to reduce carbon emissions. Now, I can look around this chamber and I can see colleagues starting over in that corner with Senator Heinrich, who has worked for years on renewable energy, and literally go around the chamber and point out colleagues who have worked with me and others on the renewable energy provisions that are part of this bipartisan agreement. This includes not just the credits for wind, but solar and renewable energy. And I would submit this is the best approach to what we have today, which is a need to make sure that critical investments are not missed out on now. Now, for the future, we do have a plan, and that is to have a technology-neutral approach that would avoid picking winners and losers and basically taking this mess of a tax code with more than 40 separate energy provisions, throwing it in the trash and saying we're going to focus on one thing, reducing carbon emissions. We aren't there today. That's what this issue is all about. But what is here today is climate change. And that is why it is so important that we pass the legislation that is in the bill and reject this amendment. So with that, I want to say to my colleagues from North Dakota, I remember enjoying going to North Dakota for the sponsor of this amendment. I will tell you, if you're over 6 feet tall, make sure you exercise before you go to North Dakota, because you will be in the smallest airline seat in the history of aviation. But John Hoeven is a very good and caring man. I'm looking forward to working with him on these issues in the future. And Mr. President, with that, I would object.
Mr. President.
Objection is heard.
Mr.
The
President.
senator from North Dakota.
I would ask my colleague from Oregon, and I did have him in North Dakota. We had a great time, and I appreciate him coming out to see the energy we produce in our great state. And I would ask the gentleman for his help on carbon capture technologies. We've put funding in place to advance those carbon capture technologies, and I ask for his help and his colleagues' help in that endeavor.
I would just say to my colleague, I'm always interested in working with him for the future. I would just say that the focus after we pass this bill, and particularly these important provisions which are going to meet immediate needs, let's just set as our lodestar reducing carbon emissions. You and I served on the Energy Committee together. That's an approach that brings together Republicans and Democrats. And with that, Mr. President, I yield.
Mr. President,
Senator from North
I thank my
Dakota.
co-sponsors on this amendment, and our efforts will continue. With that, I yield the floor.
I'd note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Hello, if you have just joined us, thank you so much for coming on. As you see on the bottom of your screen, the final vote, the Senate vote on the coronavirus relief package is expected to be at approximately 10:45 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We are about 10 minutes away from the final vote. That is the approximate time according to the C-SPAN 2 live stream. I don't want to do the takeovers again, and because I don't want you to miss the live feed out on the Senate floor. So what I'm going to do, especially because this is going to come up pretty soon, when it says approximately 10:45 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, it may even come quicker, this vote here. So I'm just going to go full screen, cut my mic, and let's listen in to the Senate floor. We are minutes away from the final vote on the coronavirus relief bill. $900 billion of relief expected if it passes through the Senate and the president signs off. This bill was passed by the House of Representatives, United States House of Representatives, the other chamber in Congress. C-SPAN says around 10:45 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If they're right, if they're correct, and we're 7 minutes away, it may even happen in 2 minutes. You never know. So we are just coming real close. And when they go live for the vote, we will tune back in. Just as a reminder for those of you who have tuned in, direct checks of $600 for Americans who have earned up to $75,000 a year, and $1,200 for couples who earn up to $150,000 per year, as well as a $600 payment for each dependent child. In terms of unemployment benefits, $300 increase in federal unemployment insurance benefits all the way through mid-March. Rental assistance is also a part of this COVID-19 relief package. $25 billion will be provided for emergency rental assistance, and also an extension of eviction moratoriums through January 31st. So those two parts, those two components are a part of the rental assistance coming to Americans. And then the direct, and then in regards to vaccine distributions, I know, there's we've seen elected officials get vaccinated, members of the United States Congress getting vaccinated. We also heard today President-elect Joe Biden receiving the COVID-19 vaccination today. Now, a lot of people are wondering, how will the distribution work for all Americans? And to address that issue, in terms of this relief package, the COVID-19 relief package states that there will be a $20 billion for vaccine distribution. This COVID-19 relief bill is 5,593 pages long. When the text was finalized this morning, and members of Congress were reading this, they only had a few hours to read through 5,593 pages. We are just minutes away. A comment regarding the direct checks from Uncle Jim. I just don't see how $600 helps, but I guess we have to live with that and do the best we can, even though we are the American people. Thanks for the comment. According to C-SPAN, we are 3 minutes away from the final vote in Congress. So it went through the United States House of Representatives, and then now the Senate upcoming. 100 senators comprise of the United States Senate. The Republican Party has the majority. In January, there will be two Georgia Senate runoff elections. The Georgia Special Senate election between Kelly Loeffler and Raphael Warnock. Kelly Loeffler, the incumbent Republican, and Raphael Warnock, the Democratic challenger. And then the Georgia Senate election will be David Perdue, the incumbent Republican, versus Democrat Jon Ossoff. If Democrats win both seats, there will be a tie in the United States Senate, and Vice President Kamala Harris, who would preside over the Senate, would be the tie-breaking vote if, people voted down the party line. However, if Republicans even split, even if they win just one seat, if they win one of those Senate races, they will still maintain the majority in the United States Senate. It appears that we are 1 minute away. For all this time, and thank you if you are even watching on Saturday and Sunday, we are about to see the final vote. So I don't want to be talking while it begins, so I'm going to cut my mic right now, and let's go down to the Senate floor. Let's go down to the United States Senate floor for the final vote on the COVID-19 relief package.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader.
would have order in the Senate? Mr. President,
Senators will please take their conversations off the floor. The Majority Leader.
I ask consent that further proceedings on the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
I ask the chair to lay before the Senate the message to accompany H.R. 1520.
The chair lays before the Senate the following message from the House.
Resolved that the House agree to the amendment of the Senate to the bill H.R. 1520 entitled An Act to Amend the Public Health Service Act to provide for the publication of a list of licensed biological products and for other purposes with an amendment to the Senate amendment.
I move to concur in the House amendment to the Senate amendment, and I know of no further debate on the motion.
Is there further debate? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion to concur is agreed to.
I ask unanimous consent the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
Now, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of H-Con Res. 128, which was received from the House.
The clerk will report.
House Concurrent Resolution 128, directing the Clerk of the House of Representatives to make a correction in the enrollment of H.R. 1520.
Is there objection to proceeding to the measure? Without an objection, the Senate will proceed.
I ask unanimous consent the resolution be agreed to. The motion be to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered. Majority Leader,
Shall all time be yielded back?
is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
Yeas and nays?
Is there a sufficient second? There is. The question is on the motion to concur. The yeas and nays are ordered. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander. Ms. Baldwin. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Bennett. Mrs. Blackburn. Mr. Blumenthal, Mr. Blunt, Mr. Booker, Mr. Bozeman, Mr. Braun, Mr. Brown, Mr. Burr, Ms. Cantwell, Mrs. Capito, Mr. Cardin, Mr. Carper, Mr. Casey, Mr. Cassidy, Mr. Coons, Mr. Coons, Mr. Cornyn, Ms. Cortez Masto, Mr. Cotton, Mr. Kramer, Mr. Crapo, Mr. Cruz, Mr. Daines, Ms. Duckworth, Mr. Durbin, Mr. Enzi, Ms. Ernst, Mrs. Feinstein, Mrs. Fisher, Mr. Gardner, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Ms. Harris, Ms. Hassan, Mr. Hawley, Mr. Heinrich, Ms. Hirono, Mr. Hoven, Mrs. Hyde-Smith, Mr. Inhofe, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Jones, Mr. Kane, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. King, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Langford, Mr. Leahy, Mr. Lee, Mrs. Leffler, Mr. Manchin, Mr. Markey, Mr. McConnell, Mr. Menendez, Mr. Merkley, Mr. Moran, Ms. Murkowski, Mr. Murphy, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Paul, Mr. Perdue, Mr. Peters, Mr. Portman, Mr. Reed, Mr. Risch, Mr. Roberts, Mr. Romney, Ms. Rosen, Mr. Rounds, Mr. Rubio, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Sass, Mr. Schatz, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Scott of Florida, Mr. Scott of South Carolina, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Shelby, Ms. Sinema, Ms. Smith, Ms. Stabenow, Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Tester, Mr. Thune, Mr. Tillis, Mr. Toomey. Mr. Udall, Mr. Van Hollen, Mr. Warner, Ms. Warren, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden, Mr. Young. Senators voting in the affirmative: Alexander, Baldwin, Barrasso, Bennett, Blumenthal, Bozeman, Brown, Burr, Cantwell, Capito, Cardin, Carper, Casey, Cassidy, Collins, Cornyn, Cortez Masto, Cotton, Kramer, Crapo, Daines, Duckworth, Durbin, Ernst, Feinstein, Fisher, Gardner, Gillibrand, Graham, Grassley, Hassan, Heinrich, Hirono, Hoven, Heidsmith, Inhofe, Jones, Kane, Kelly, Kennedy, King, Klobuchar, Langford, Leahy, Leffler, Manchin, Markey, Merkley, Moran, Murphy, Murray, Peters, Portman, Reed, Risch, Roberts, Romney, Rosen, Rubio, Sanders, Schatz, Schumer, Shaheen, Shelby, Sinema, Smith, Stabenow, Sullivan, Tester, Thune, Tillis, Toomey, Van Hollen, Warner, Warren, Wicker, Wyden, Young. Mr. Blunt, aye. Senators voting in the negative: Blackburn, Johnson, Lee, Hall, Scott of Florida. Mr. Cruz, no. Mr. Coons, aye. Mr. McConnell, aye. Ms. Harris, aye. Ms. Murkowski, aye. Mr. Menendez, aye. Mr. Booker, aye. Mr. Hawley, aye. Mr. Udall. Mr. Udall, aye. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Whitehouse, aye. What's that? Mr. Purdue. Mr. Purdue, aye.
So, yeah, 5. 'Cause we have to do
Mr. Braun. Mr. Braun. Aye.
So right now it's 90-6. Yes, the coronavirus relief package will pass. We're just watching the final votes trickle in.
Mr. Scott of South Carolina. Aye. Mr. Sass. Aye.
If you have just joined the broadcast, the vote is almost finished. 2 more votes. There's 100 senators, 92 yes, 6 no, 60 votes were needed. The COVID-19 relief package vote in the Senate goes through, and now just one more step, President Trump's signature to sign off on the $900 billion COVID-19 relief package. If you have just joined this broadcast right now, the COVID-19 relief package passes through the Senate and will go to the president's desk. It passed the United States House of Representatives earlier today. 2 more votes away, 92 yes votes, 6 no votes, 60 votes are needed, and so far it is safe to say that this COVID-19 relief package has passed. As we see the last votes trickle in, let's do a quick review of what this relief package is. The direct check component, $600 direct checks for Americans who have earned up to $75,000 a year and $1,200 for couples earning up to $150,000 per year. Also a $600 payment for each dependent child. A family without a social security number is still qualified for direct payments. Now you may ask, what is the timeline? When will Americans get those direct checks? Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin told CNBC, quote, people are going to see this money at the beginning of next week, unquote. Rental assistance, $25 billion will be provided for emergency rental assistance. An extension of eviction moratoriums through January 31st are also a part of the package. Unemployment benefits, $300 increase in federal unemployment insurance benefits through mid-March. Vaccine distribution funds, $20 billion. In the final step, President Trump has to sign the bill. He is expected to sign the bill, according to White House spokesman Ben Williamson. Yes, I just said it passed. Those of you who are asking it, yes, the bill did pass. We're just waiting for 2 more votes. There are 100 US senators, and right now only 98 votes confirmed. So I'm just staying here, waiting for the last 2 votes to trickle in to have an official vote total for you. I just outlined some of the details a little bit earlier on this relief package. I can go over it again if you want. You may, I don't know if there's a delay with the comments. I'm getting the comments through HAPS television, and this is being multicasted through Twitter and YouTube and also on HAPS. So I may not see all the comments directly in real time at the same time you enter in the comments. So there may be a little bit of a delay in terms of the comments. However, I can go over the details again. If you did not hear or see me outline the details of the COVID-19 relief package. Thank you for tuning into this COVID-19 relief package vote broadcast. I'm Cameron Sadeghi from HAPS TV. The coronavirus relief package passes through the House and now, as you see on your screen, through the Senate. 60 votes are needed, and so far 92 yeses. There are just 2 more votes to be trickled in because there are 100 US senators. I'm going to end the broadcast from here. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight to this COVID-19 relief vote. For everyone at HAPS TV, I'm Cameron Sadeghi. Thanks so much for tuning in. Have a great night.